Maine history. Secrets of the Northeast's forgotten frontier. Maine, the northeastern edge of the United States, where the forests grow thick, the Atlantic crashes against jagged cliffs, and the past whispers through pine-covered hills. It is the largest of New England's 6 states, and yet, it often feels like the most forgotten. But beneath its quiet surface lies a history unlike any other, one shaped by ancient tribes, hidden battles, and lands once feared as the frozen ground. Bound by the Canadian provinces of Quebec and New Brunswick to the north, and by New Hampshire to the west, Maine stretches into the Atlantic like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Its 2,300 square miles of inland water ripple with untold stories, lakes, rivers, and deep forests that once served as sacred spaces for its earliest inhabitants. The name Maine itself is shrouded in ambiguity. Some say it honors the French province of Maine, while others claim it refers to the mainland, to distinguish it from the coastal islands. But long before any European name was spoken here, the Algonquian-speaking people called this land something more evocative, the land of the frozen ground. Among the first known peoples of Maine were the Abenaki and the Mi'kmaq. The Abenaki settled along the rivers and coasts, living in rhythm with the land, hunting, fishing, and cultivating corn, beans, and squash. To the east, the Mi'kmaq, fierce and war-ready, guarded their domain, stretching into what is now New Brunswick. Together, they ruled a vast wilderness veiled in mist and mystery. But the arrival of European settlers changed everything. Disease, war, and displacement ravaged the native populations. Some tribes vanished into the shadows of history, while others were forced into reservations or absorbed into white communities. Today, only 5 federally recognized tribes remain in the state, and of them, the Penobscot and Passamaquoddy still maintain a visible presence. Their memory, however, is far from lost. It lingers in Maine's place names, in the shape of the ancient trails and the curve of hidden rivers. It's in the snowshoe and the toboggan, in the dark soil where maize still grows, and in the enduring respect for the wild landscapes that have always defined this land. Maine was admitted to the Union on March 15, 1820, becoming the 23rd state. But in many ways, it never truly surrendered its frontier spirit. Its vast woods still hide the footprints of the past. Its coasts echo with forgotten voices. And its history, like its winters, remains cold, quiet, and utterly haunting. The earliest European encounters with Maine are cloaked in shadows and uncertainty. Legends suggest that Norsemen, the Vikings, may have touched these shores, but solid evidence remains elusive, lost to time and tide. Even John Cabot's voyages in the late 1490s, often credited with early British claims, leave behind more questions than answers. Yet the mystery didn't deter explorers. Through the 1500s, Portuguese, Spanish, French, and English navigators ventured into these cold Atlantic waters, probing Maine's jagged coastlines, secretive bays, and winding rivers. By the early 1600s, temporary summer fisheries dotted the islands, and fur trading had begun between Europeans and native tribes. In 1641, one of Maine's most enduring footprints of colonial ambition was established. York, a small coastal settlement, became the first chartered city in what would become the United States. But Maine's promise came at a steep cost, and conflict was never far behind. The land that is now Maine was claimed by 2 empires, France and England. From 1615 to 1763, it became a shifting battleground, not just between European rivals, but with Native American nations drawn into the struggle. Skirmishes turned to war. Alliances formed and collapsed. The forested frontier became a place where no side could claim peace. Royal patents granted by King Charles I gave Maine its own provincial status within New England. But Massachusetts had other ideas. Throughout the 1600s, the Puritans aggressively annexed swaths of Maine's territory. After Sir Ferdinando Gorges, the original proprietor, supported the losing side in England's civil wars, Massachusetts tightened its grip, and those settlers in the rugged interior grew increasingly restless under Massachusetts' rule. The wealthy merchants along the coast resisted independence. That is, until the War of 1812. As British raids hammered the unprotected Maine coastline, resentment exploded. The people felt abandoned, and that betrayal finally tipped the balance. In 1820, Maine broke free and entered the Union as a free state, under the terms of the Missouri Compromise. But even statehood did not end the tension. A boundary dispute with Britain ignited again, this time over the vague wording of the 1783 Treaty of Paris. It all hinged on the elusive highlands that supposedly separated U.S. territory from British Canada. No one could quite agree where those highlands lay. The result was a standoff that nearly turned violent, the so-called Aroostook War of 1838 to 1839, a war with no official battles, no bloodshed, and yet immense political consequence. A truce brokered by General Winfield Scott allowed for joint control of the contested land. It wasn't until 1842, with the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, that the land was finally divided, not by force, but by fragile diplomacy. And so Maine, often overlooked on modern maps, proved to be a stage for international rivalry, hidden wars, and one of the strangest territorial disputes in American history. Beneath its tranquil forests and fishing towns lies a legacy of explorers, empires, and unresolved ghosts of ambition. When Maine entered the Union in 1820, it was with more hope than certainty. Though its lands were wild and rich with resources, prosperity would not come easily, and for many, it never truly arrived. Entrepreneurs rushed north, chasing dreams of fortune in fur, fish, timber, and land. The promise was real, but so were the barriers. Bitter winters, ongoing border disputes, and the lure of more fertile, forgiving soil to the west slowed migration and stifled the early momentum of settlement. Still, for a brief period, between 1830 and 1860, Maine seemed poised for greatness. During those 3 decades, the state surged with economic life. Towering forests fed a booming lumber trade. Winter ice, carved and shipped far beyond its borders, became a global export. Granite and lime were hewn from the land, and shipbuilders along the coast launched majestic vessels into the Atlantic. Railroads snaked inland, connecting the coast to the interior. Maine's merchants reached across oceans, and its harbors bustled with trade. But the tides of history soon shifted. The American Civil War siphoned off both labor and capital, and by the late 19th century, Maine's golden era was slipping away. Industry changed, and so did the state. Textiles and paper mills emerged as major employers, but they brought with them economic instability. Agriculture and fishing still endured, but both became increasingly precarious. The picture that emerged was one of uneasy survival, prosperity that came and went with the pulse of the national economy. The 20th century did little to alter that uncertainty. From the mid-1900s onward, Maine's once dominant industries began to fade. The factories that once churned out shoes, textiles, wood products, and electronics fell silent. Farms shrank. Fish stocks dwindled. Even the military pulled back, shuttering bases that had long been economic anchors. What remained was a state searching for a new identity. It found one, in part, through its natural beauty. Tourism surged. Visitors were drawn to the state's pristine forests, rocky shores, and quiet villages. But environmental concerns also came to the forefront. Clear-cut logging stripped once majestic woodlands. Rivers choked with waste were finally forced into cleanup. The Maine Yankee nuclear plant closed. New laws, stricter than ever, began to guard the state's fragile ecosystems. Amid these changes, Maine's population began to grow, more in the 1970s and 80s than at any time before. And through it all, the cultural fabric of the state began to shift in subtle, powerful ways. In 1980, a long overdue reckoning with the past arrived. The federal government awarded more than $80 million to the Passamaquoddy and Penobscot tribes, restitution for land unjustly seized centuries earlier. Much of the money was used to reclaim land silent, forested stretches once stripped from their ancestors, and to invest in new economic pathways. Meanwhile, another long-silenced voice stirred. The French heritage of many Mainers, long overshadowed and suppressed, began to re-emerge. Today, Franco-American festivals and cultural celebrations breathe life into communities where French roots run deep, a quiet, defiant revival of identity once buried. In the story of Maine's statehood and economic journey, there are no easy triumphs. Instead, it's a tale of resilience, of a state that endured boom and bust, war and renewal, exploitation and reclamation. And beneath the surface of every faded mill town, every ice-cold river, and every windswept port lies a history that still speaks, if you know where to listen. Politics in Maine has never been just a matter of parties and power. It has always echoed something deeper. A struggle not just for governance, but for identity. A quiet battle between tradition and transformation, carried out in town halls, parlor rooms, and the wind-beaten polling stations scattered across this ancient land. From the moment Maine achieved statehood in 1820, it fell under the sway of Jeffersonian and Jacksonian Democrats. But that would change. By 1854, as the abolition movement gained momentum, a new political force was born here, the Republican Party, forged in the fires of moral conviction and frontier resolve. For nearly a century, the grand old party ruled Maine, with seemingly unshakable dominance. Yet politics in Maine has never followed a predictable path for long. Cracks appeared in the early 20th century. The Democrats made brief gains in the elections of 1910 and 1912, only to fade again until the storm of the Great Depression. In the elections of 1932 and 1934, economic desperation gave Democrats a renewed voice. But it wasn't until 1954 that a lasting balance between the two major parties began to take hold. Since then, Maine's political climate has shifted like its seasons, cold and hard one moment, warm with change the next. Republicans, Democrats, and independents have all claimed the governor's seat. The legislature, once a stronghold of conservative thinking, has increasingly tilted toward Democrats. But what defines Maine politically is not partisanship, it's independence. A state where voters think for themselves and break ranks when conscience calls. But Maine's history isn't just about politicians, it's about people, and the causes they have dared to champion. Throughout its past, Maine has been a crucible for reform. From abolition to prohibition, from women's suffrage to world peace, this rocky land has harbored movements ahead of their time. Here, the harshness of frontier life forged not only resilience, but idealism, a belief that society could, and should, be made more just. That spirit continued into the 21st century. In May 2009, under a Democratic governor who initially opposed the idea, Maine became one of the first states to legalize same-sex marriage through legislative action. The decision was overturned by voters just months later, a setback, but not the end. In 2012, the people of Maine returned to the polls, and this time, they said yes. It was a moment that revealed something essential about this state. That change may come slowly here, but when it arrives, it is carved in granite. And so, Maine's political journey continues, as turbulent as independent, and as full of contradictions as the state itself. If you're fascinated by forgotten stories, hidden conflicts, and the powerful undercurrents that shaped America, you're in the right place. Subscribe to History Love, where the past is never quiet, and every state has a secret. Like, share, and comment below. What surprised you most about Maine's history?